And hello, Jets fans, and welcome to another edition of Rich Sports Talk. I'm your host, Nolan Rich. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program today for a special episode. I know you didn't expect me to be back until Friday, but breaking news out of the NFL, which does slightly impact the Jets, and we wanted to talk about that today. But hey, if you're new to the channel and you're a New York Jets fan, or you know someone that are Jets fans and they want to just join our community, hey, tell them to hit that subscribe button right down there. We want as many Jet fans as part of this as possible. So we start off with big news in the NFL today, which is Jamal Adams, the former New York Jet, will now miss the remainder of the 2021 season with a torn labrum. There's so much to talk about this, his impact in Seattle, and also the trade itself. We'll get to the trade a little bit, but in the short term, this is a nightmare for Seattle because not only has Jamal Adams torn his labrum again, and it's the same labrum, but this has to be concerning for the Seattle Seahawks because Jamal Adams now has only played in 12 regular season games in both of his seasons with Seattle. They, of course, invested the $72 million contract extension this offseason. And we're talking about a guy whose style is a physical style, throwing his body all over there and really playing with a reckless abandonment. And we've seen the results of it, and it's led to injuries, now missing more time. And for a team that really is trying to do the impossible, which is go on a miracle run to end this season and somehow miraculously get into the postseason, this is a major blow. And again, I know Jamal Adams has not been good this year, especially in coverage for this team, but he is clearly one of the best defensive players on that unit. And of course, one of the more important pieces of that unit. And we talk about a team that's really top heavy. They're a star driven team. And when one of their big stars is out, that's going to be a big impact. But for the Jets, this could be a big win because once again, the Jets hold Seattle's first round pick, and the worse the Seahawks do, the better it is for the Jets' fortunes. But again, I've said this before on this channel. We continue to say this, but this has to be arguably the greatest trade in Jets franchise history and potentially one of the biggest ones in the NFL for what the Jets got for Jamal Adams. And I actually thought about this today, and Jet fans, you can put in the chat what you think about this, but almost just today, even before the Jets use that next first round pick, it feels like the Jets have already run this trade because they've used that capital for Jamal Adams to get a premier player in Elijah Vera Tucker. And I've thought about this today. Would I take Elijah Vera Tucker straight up for Jamal Adams? And the answer is absolutely. Because it is incredibly hard to find elite offensive linemen in the NFL. And it looks like Elijah Vera Tucker is on his way to being a Pro Bowl player for the New York Jets and a consistent one on the offensive line. And those guys, they are incredibly difficult to find in the NFL. And they've already gotten that. And of course, the Jets will get another first round pick. And there's a lot of concern if you're in Seattle right now, not only about Jamal and the contract that he signed, not only the length of the contract he is signed to, but you look at Seattle right now, they are a mess. And it's not getting any better. And the biggest thing that Seattle could have maybe looked at this season and said, well, wait a minute, at least we have a high draft pick to address the problems, but they don't have that because of the Jamal Adams trade. And it is very interesting, too, because, you know, the old cliche, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And we heard about it forever with Jamal Adams. We heard about how he wanted to play for a contender, how he wanted to play for a great organization, how he wanted to play for a winning team. And last year, he got that. He got to play in his first playoff game with the Seattle Seahawks. But I was thinking about this today, and this could get very interesting for both Jamal and the Seahawks. I'm going to preface this by saying this right now. I do not believe this will happen. I really do not believe the following will happen. But if it does, it could be a rough go in Seattle. Russell Wilson is clearly not happy. And Russell Wilson has hinted in the past that if it doesn't work in Seattle, he'd like to move on from Seattle. My belief is Seattle this offseason will do everything in their power to make Russell Wilson happy. I believe they're going to move on from Pete Carroll. I believe they're going to find a coach that Russell wants. I believe that they will do everything to make sure that Russell Wilson is happy and doesn't want to leave Seattle, and basically almost give him the Tom Brady treatment in Tampa Bay and basically say, like, what players do you want? Almost making him like there's a GM, but Russell Wilson has say over the roster construction, especially the offense. But again, let's say hypothetically, Russell says, you know what? I'm done. I don't want to play here anymore. I need to get out. And some team trades even multiple first round picks to Seattle, and they move on from Pete Carroll. Jamal Adams' comments in New York were always, I'm sick of this losing. It's depressing to lose. It's embarrassing to lose. But Jamal Adams could well be on a new version of the Jets if this happens. Because think about this. If they move on from Russell Wilson, they will then have a rookie quarterback. They will have a rookie head coach. They will also be in arguably the toughest division in football in the NFC West, with a very good San Francisco team that is looking to rebound. And again, will likely be starting Trey Lance next year, who they believe is a franchise quarterback. Kyler Murray, who before his injury is likely an MVP candidate in a very good Arizona team. And then you have the LA Rams, who have basically gone all in and made a super team in LA. While I think is a talented team and probably won't win a Super Bowl, they are still a very good football team and a team that will be a playoff contender. What does that leave Seattle if they have to move on from Russell Wilson? It will be what Jamal Adams was at the Jets. Young coach, young quarterback, growing pains in a tough division. How's that going to sit with Jamal Adams? A player who has worn his emotions on his sleeve, and I get it. He wants to win, and I get as an NFL player, you are dying to win. But what happens to Jamal if that happens? Will he become a distraction in Seattle? Will he want to be traded from Seattle? And if that's the case, what's Seattle going to do? Because I don't think there's a team right now that really wants to pay Jamal Adams' salary. I don't think they're going to give premium picks up for Jamal Adams. And even when the contract was signed, the extension this summer, I was like most fans, and the reaction was, okay, I guess you got him locked up, but that was an awful lot of money for Jamal Adams. And look, every player deserves his money, and congratulations, Jamal Adams got the contract that he deserves, and he got the big money, and he got the contract, and we saw it. He played it right. He got the money. But this is the problem now is in the NFL, when you invest big money in big players and big young players, you better hit on them. And right now, the return on Jamal Adams has not been good this year. Now, granted, Jamal could be healthy next year, play all 17 games, look like a Pro Bowler. They used him more like they did in the first year as more of a pass rusher than in coverage. And he looks like a good safety. And you know what? That'd be great for Jamal. And you'd like to see Jamal play well. But now he's had 2 torn labrums, and it's the same one. Basically, from what I've been told, he's actually been having, under his pads, they've been basically locking up his shoulder. Like he has to wear a special harness to make sure his shoulder doesn't fly out. Now he's torn that labrum again. And this is a guy that wants to play physical, wants to hit people, wants to play physical football in the box. And you look at like right now, could this be a guy whose body breaks down? And he's one of those guys that has a great career, but it's a shorter career because of how physical he played. Because you look at Jamal Adams is a great athlete. But even for a safety, he's a bit small. And that's the thing. You look at his size. When they play him at the linebacker position, he's small for a linebacker. But the Seattle Seahawks play him a lot linebacker. I mean, you look, he plays about 40 to 50% of the snaps in the box as a linebacker. And it's not just in the run game, but then you talk about 300-pound offensive linemen who get to the second layer pounding on Jamal. You talk about tight ends pounding on Jamal, and it adds up. It adds up pretty quickly. So you look right now, the Jets have already won this trade, and it could get worse for Seattle because what do the Jets do with that pick? It's likely going to be a premium player, and don't be surprised, too, if the Jets turn that into more picks. I mean, that's one of the reasons we talk about the Laramie Tunsil trade being so significant for the Miami's because Miami turned that into multiple first-round picks. What if a quarterback falls to that position, or a really touted player that some team is desperate to have falls to the Jets, and they basically trade back in the first round but get multiple picks to fill out a roster that, let's be honest, is bereft of talent? This could be a huge trade that still isn't done yet for the Jets, because they could trade that first round pick. Like, they might get a blue chip player with the top 4 or 5 pick that their team's likely going to finish up with. But, like, let's say one of the best receivers falls to number 8, where, like, let's say Seattle picks 8. We'll just say they're picking 8 just for hypothetical. What if the best receiver falls down? What if the best cornerback falls down? What, especially if a quarterback falls? Like, I don't think Pickett's going to fall outside the top 5, but let's say like a Malik Willis, or a quarterback falls to the Jets at 8, and the team picking at 9 wants a quarterback. You don't think a team's going to jump up and trade and give the Jets a lot of picks? Deshaun Thomas, Jets did nothing with those picks. Yeah, they already have done something with it. They drafted Elijah Vera Tucker, who looks like a future all-pro offensive guard, and has been rated as the highest rookie guard in the NFL this year. I mean, Elijah Vera Tucker has been a stud. And I said this to start the show. I believe that even today, like, if you had to do the trade straight up, I would take Elijah Vera Tucker over Jamal Adams, because you can get safeties. You cannot get premium offensive linemen. Elijah Vera Tucker looks like a premium offensive lineman. And on top of that, the Jets are still going to get a first-round pick this year. And like I was just saying, it might not just be the first-round pick. They might trade it back to get more picks and more players. So that is something to definitely keep an eye on. I mean, Elijah Vera Tucker has been a stud for the Jets. Already looks like a great player. And you look, too, like I said, what happens if Seattle's terrible again next year if somehow Russell Wilson gets traded? And like I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Seahawks are going to do everything in their power to make sure Russell Wilson is happy and make sure he stays there, and they're not going to upset the apple cart. But again, is Jamal Adams next year, if the team at the trade deadline is 2-6, 3-5? I mean, when he was with the Jets, he made it clear that his number one destination was Dallas. He's from the area. What happens next year if Seattle's bad again and Dallas is once again looks like a Super Bowl contender like they do this year? Could Jamal Adams basically start calling out Seattle and saying, hey, trade me to Dallas? I mean, things could be better. Douglas has been bad. Vera Tucker was a no-brainer. The other picks have been bad. I mean, this draft, has been good, Deshaun. I mean, I do think that I still believe in Zach Wilson while the jury's still on him. I mean, Elijah Moore looks like he can be a future superstar. I mean, Michael Carr looks like a valuable running back. They got Michael Carr, the defensive back, who looks like he can be a starter. I mean, to me, they had a great draft this year. And again, I always say this with Joe Douglas. People want, if you want to kill his free agency, fine. But I almost think you have to throw out the first draft for him now. Because again, this is like we talked about this all the time. And finally, the Jets are on the right timeline where you have a general manager or a coach working together. And even with Gase last year or in the 2020 draft, you felt the sense that, yeah, they were building it for Gase, but almost felt like if Gase didn't do a good job early, it was done. Like Gase, it was almost like a dead man walking in that draft. And again, they drafted for very vastly different schemes. I mean, one big thing about the Jets, which helped for 10 years, was even though the coaches' staff changed, primarily they ran a 3-4 defense, which was very similar. But this year they had a massive overhaul. They went to the 4-3 defense. They changed the offense dramatically. And again, you look, the guys who they drafted for Saleh and Saleh's scheme, they are looking really good. It's the players in the 2020 draft who they drafted for Adam Gase's scheme that are struggling. But again, it's like buying ingredients for vastly different chefs. So I have to give Joe Douglas credit. And you can criticize Joe Douglas on some of the draft picks in 2020. That's fair. You can judge You can treat Joe Douglas and you can, bang on his free agency signings. That's fine. You cannot bang on his trades. The Jamal Adams trade was a steal. The Chris Herndon trade was a steal. The Lauren Duvernay-Tardif trade was a steal because they've also gotten the practice squad player back already. They already got Dan Brown back, and they basically got a starting guard in the NFL for nothing. I mean, Joe Douglas You can maybe bang on some of the draft picks. You can bang on the free agency. You cannot say he has not been a good trader. Like, think about all the trades the Jets have made, especially for draft picks. You're like, okay, they made out pretty darn good for Jamal Adams. They made out pretty darn good for Chris Herndon. I mean, you look at the trades to get draft picks, the Jets look really good. Now, again, they still have to hit on those draft picks, especially this year. But again, they trade Chris Herndon, who's a guy they were thinking about cutting for a fourth-round pick. And they drafted him in the fourth round. So they basically got equal value back for a fourth-round pick. I mean, players are like used cars, unfortunately, in the NFL. Like, once they get taken off the lot, their value should go down. Now I was hoping they'd get like, maybe a 6th-round pick or a conditional pick. Like, if Herndon plays 10 games, he'll be a 5th-round selection. They got a straight-up 4th-round pick. So you have to say, and Justin Jets Douglas is great. Agreed. The 2020 draft has been amazing. Yeah. And again, like, you look at this trade, I mean, this trade still isn't over. And it's like, if you were to tell the Jets when they made the Jamal Adams trade, when they made that trade, they were assuming that Seattle was a Super Bowl contender. And the thought process was the 2 first-round picks that they got from Seattle were likely going to be between 27 and 32. And even last year when they got 25th and the Jets used that to trade up to get to 14 with Elijah Vera Tucker, you still thought that was kind of high for Seattle because many Jet fans were surprised they got knocked down in the first round, especially with the Jared Goff injury. And you were just watching that game and just thinking, wow, Seattle 25th was a lot better than we ever thought we were going to get from Seattle. And this year, if you were to tell me any Jet fan coming into this season, hey, that Seattle pick the Jets got, there's a chance it might be top 5, but it's probably going to be a top 10 pick this year, maybe even as high as like a top 8 pick. Most Jet fans would probably have you drug tested because they're saying there's no way that's going to happen. There's no way they're going to get that with Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll. They have those great weapons, and I know their division's tough, and still you're like, and now they lose Jamal Adams, and that's only going to hurt their defense. Although, wouldn't it be ironic if like the safety they bring in plays better and has better coverage grade than Jamal Adams? I mean, that would be something very interesting. Now we're getting questions in the chat. Once again, guys, if you have any questions in the chat, responses to the trade, how you feel about the Jamal Adams trade. And again, it does suck because, again, like, I don't want to see anyone get hurt. And you don't want to see anyone's career be impacted by an injury like this. But the thing with this trade was this was a player that clearly wanted out of New York. He wanted to go to a better opportunity, and he's been there. But it's kind of funny because they're basically in the same position as the Jets are this year. And it's just one of those trades where, like, you would have been happy and realistically with a 2nd and maybe a 5th-round pick for Jamal. And the fact that the Jets got 2 first-rounders, a starting safety, and 3rd is still amazing. Do you think the Jets should bring back Crowder and or Cole? I don't think Crowder's coming back. Cole I would bring back because I think he's a valuable 4th receiver that can stretch the field, and he's got chemistry with Zach Wilson. I believe that their thought process is they have Elijah Moore that can play a lot in the slot, and especially if they go out and get another X receiver this offseason, whether it's draft or free agency, that they can play him more in the slot. I mean, Braxton Berrios has been very good for the Jets, and don't forget, he's younger, he's cheaper, and on top of that, he's a great returner for the Jets. So really Crowder, even Crowder this year, I mean, there's a good chance, and I was surprised he's back even after they restructured the contract. And in some parts of me were surprised they didn't try to move Crowder at the deadline. But again, I think that Cole will be back. I don't think Crowder will be back. And again, we'll do the preview show on Friday morning. We will be talking about, of course, one of the favorite Jets topics of all time, Denzel Mims, and how does he fit into this offense the rest of the season. Since the last recording, Corey Davis, of course, the news came out right after I finished on Monday. Corey Davis is out for the season with a core injury, which means Denzel Mims is free, ladies and gentlemen. Denzel Mims, the rest of the season will be Mims is the word. We will see. Of course, Braden, Mims, I do think is going to get his opportunity. And really, this is on him. I mean, he's had time to learn the playbook. He's got an opportunity right now. He's got a quarterback that's been playing better. And again, if he can establish a rapport with Zach Wilson, that will be big. Um, Man, I'm done being hype over picks. Come on, as fans, we have to demand more from the Jets. Year after year, we're getting drafted, so we still suck. I mean, yeah, but it's a process. I mean, you still got to build through the draft, and it's painful. But again, the Jets are still paying for incompetent general managers beforehand. I mean, I always use this example. Mike McCagnon, there's still contracts on the book, even though he still hasn't been the Jets general manager for 3 years. I mean, the Tremaine Johnson contract, this is the last year, it's on the books. So, I mean, and again, that's going to be, and Justin Jets, I'm going to talk about more of this on Friday. We'll have to see. Elijah Moore is day to day. I mean, I think he will play just because it just came out. I'm guessing it was a little bit of aggravation in practice. Usually when they say day to day, they're just taking it cautiously. But again, if they feel it's a significant injury, when your team's got 3 wins, I think that the smart especially when you found a great young player, is, you'd rather lose him for a game and be smart than try to throw him out there. But again, it's one of those situations too where I just feel like the Jets still they still have some decent receivers, and this is the reason why I think they were so involved in adding so many receivers. I mean, they still got Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder, Braxton Berrios, and Denzel Mims. I mean, this isn't a situation like it's not ideal to not have Elijah Moore and Corey Davis for obvious reasons. They're clearly the 2 best receivers on the team. But at least we're not in a situation like with Sam Darnold where he was throwing to Deontay Burnett and, practice squad players. And trying to remember, who was the practice squad player? I'm really drawing a blank here. I don't know if you guys can throw it in the chat. He played a lot in that game. He was the 3rd round pick from McCagnon. He played a lot in that game, and it was like, oh, okay. But again, this is still a situation too where the Jets are in a situation where they have at least depth of wide receiver. It's not ideal, but at least you feel like you're going with some complement of receiver. Braxton Berrios has had a great season. He's always available. Look, he leads the league in kick return average, which to me is amazing. He's had a really good season. He's been solid, and he was a guy coming out in the draft that I always really liked. I mean, you saw him at Miami, very explosive player, especially in the return game. And a guy that, was brought in to make plays. And look, is he going to be a dominant wide receiver? No, but he's a guy that, can break the field, can break off a big play potentially, and is a good slot receiver. And he does multiple things. He's a good kick returner. So it's, if the Jets don't get 6 or 7 wins, it's the time to let go Joe D. I do think there'll be a lot of pressure on Joe next season. But again, it's the nature of those 6 or 7 wins. I mean, if the Jets are fighting for a playoff spot in late November or early December, and let's say they have a bunch of injuries late in the season and they fall off like the last 3 games, I mean, there's varying different degrees of how you can get to 6 or 7 wins. I mean, if the team plays well and plays close games and loses a couple of heartbreaking close games late in the season, but you can tell that they're right there almost. I mean, I think it's hard to just say, 6 wins. I do think if it's 6 wins, it'll be tough, but it's also the context of how they win games and how they compete in the other games. I mean, if they win 6 games and get absolutely blown out the rest of the games, then it doesn't really matter. Jets must go defense. I'm glad you bring that up. I'm definitely going to be doing a mock draft, 3-round mock draft at the 3rd quarter season mark, to talk about what the Jets should do in the first 3 rounds, their first 5 picks. So you guys are going to tune into that. I do think you're going to see at least 1 defensive player go off the board. I don't think you're going to see 2. I do think you're going to see a lot of defensive players in the 2nd and 3rd round. But I do think the Jets, because they're going to have over $60 million in cap space, they're going to be hyper-aggressive in free agency, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think outside of adding receiver or maybe an offensive lineman in free agency, maybe a tight end, I do think that you're going to see the Jets, most of their resources in free agency, go to the defense. So that will definitely be something to keep an eye on. But again, the draft's also hard. Like you get a clearer picture after free agency because then you know what the holes are and then you know what they're going to be looking for. A lot of this is speculation because, like, for example, if the Jets go out and sign like a JC Jackson or a Stephon Gilmore, like that's going to change the priority of getting a cornerback early. That's going to change if they go out and they get a good linebacker too. That's going to change the idea if they're going to take a linebacker. And then, of course, if they go really heavy offensive free agency, then okay, they're going to go completely defense the entire draft. I mean, kind of what the Panthers did in Matt Rule's first season. Fan contract extension, especially with him holding down the left tackle spot. So when Beckham returns, he might not play as well on the right side. I mean, look, he played great on the right side even beforehand. So I'm not worried about Fant. The biggest thing is the contract. I know people are saying like, well, the number is a little bit high, but I'd rather pay a little extra for a good offensive lineman I know is going to be out there and playing. Who do you see signing here that's actually worth it? I don't know you mean in terms of free agency or in terms of internal contracts. Since free agents are our chances at a comp pick, why not use some of this draft capital and money on trades? It seems good teams trade for players and the Jets. And that's the other thing about the draft capital too. And I'm glad you brought this up, which I think is important, which is, I mean, a lot of the big trades, I mean, you look like Stephon Diggs was a later round pick. I mean, there's guys that get moved and the Jets can get a great receiver for like a later pick. Like, let's say, for example, the Bears franchise Allen Robinson again, but the Jets can trade like one of their fourth round picks and maybe a pick next year to get Allen Robinson, a true number one receiver. I mean, you can use the draft picks to also get players too in terms of trades, like and to help shore up this team. So that's another way the Jets can address it. And in terms of the comp picks, the thing too, I think free agency is going to be very telling. Joe Douglas is standing. If he is somewhat conservative and not really breaking the bank and really investing and going over the top, investing in players, I do think he feels he's got a longer runway and that there's really not a ton of heat on him yet. But if, Woody Johnson comes to the office and says, like, look, we need to make the playoffs next year, we need to make a splash, and puts that pressure on him, and you see him really overspend for players, which is really not his cup of tea, I mean, that's going to tell you that, ownership is really getting on to make a move. So free agency is also going to be very telling about where Joe Douglas's job, I really do think, stands. So I do think that's going to be an interesting pack because I always say with football and business, you have to really read in between the lines and, actions speak louder than words. Like an organization can tell you one thing, but when they make moves and when they do certain investments and how they portray themselves and how they act really tells you what you think. So if you see Joe Douglas going nuts in free agency, it's because he feels like he needs to go out there and make a splash. And if he's like he was last year, looking for good contracts, good players, but not overly exerting the books, then I do think he feels he's got at least another year afterward. Evan Neal in the draft. I said if Evan Neal's there, he's going to run to the podium. But I don't think Evan Neal's going to be because really the way I'm projecting, I do think the top four is what it's going to be. I mean, somehow the Lions win a couple games. Maybe Houston flips up there. But again, I mean, the Jets, I do think Jets can be Jacksonville, but I still think the Jets are going to have the fourth pick in the draft. And I do think the order the way it is, like if Jacksonville's in front of the Jets, Neal's not getting to the Jets because Jacksonville's a disaster, especially their offensive line. Neal's going to go there. But again, like if it was up to me and it came down, this would be a great debate. If it came down, and you guys can put this in chat, between Kavon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal, who would you take? Now, I think a lot of people would say, well, it's obvious. You go and take the great pass rusher. But with Neal, if you can get two elite offensive tackles, I do think there's something to be said about that. But I've also been of the opinion, and I know it's not a popular opinion, especially among Jet fans, but I feel like if you get Neal, you almost have to draft Neal too because you need an insurance policy for Mekhi Becton because Mekhi Becton, of course, SNY had the video today of him doing sprints. And then you had Sal in the press conference today saying they hope he's back for the next season. But again, this was a guy who we assume would be back by now. It was a 4 to 8 week injury, still isn't back on the team. And at the end of the day, he's going to play less than 40% of the possible snaps that he could have in the first 2 years. So if Evan Neal's there, I think the Jets are almost pressured to take Neal over Thibodeaux because in a perfect world, if Mekhi Becton can stay healthy, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But if it's also a situation where the Jets are trying to make Zach Wilson work and Salah's job and Douglas's job is about making Zach Wilson work as a quarterback. If Neal is there, you almost have to take him as an insurance policy because best case scenario, you have two elite tackles. Worst case scenario, Neal becomes the blind sign protector for the immediate future because Mekhi Becton, as great as he is, I mean, even coming out, he had injury concerns, and now you have a guy that's not even 25 yet having injury concerns and missing a lot of significant time because in the NFL, there's been a lot of players where we see that they have elite talent. They could be superstars. But the most the most important attribute to me as an NFL player is, are you available? Do you play in the games? Because you can be the most talented player in the world, but if you're not on the field, it doesn't matter. KD, I don't know if this is the Kevin Durant. I'm just kidding. Can you see Jets pulling in Derek Stingley and Andrew Booth with both first-round picks? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I actually like Braden here. Like one guy that is kind of falling through the cracks a little bit, and I do think would be interesting, especially with where Seattle's pick is Karlaftis, the pass rusher from Purdue. I'm not as high as him as the other two, but to me, he's a little bit like John Franklin Myers in the sense that you can move him around. He's an interchangeable piece. He might not be a pure edge, but a very good pass rusher, very good with his hands, is able to get up the field, relentless player. I don't think he has the higher end talent of Thibodeaux and Hutchinson, but again, I do think he could be one of the better defensive linemen in the NFL. But the DBs, like, I don't think that the Jets are going to take a DB in the first two picks. And I've said this before, and I'll keep saying this. I'll do it on the mock draft, and I'll just say this really quickly. Number one, the Jets need an impact corner, and you see corners in the first top 10. How many great corners have really gone in the top 10 and become great players? Because the problem is they put them on a team's number one receiver. They lose confidence. And really the biggest bust of the last 5 to 10 years have mostly been corners taken in the first 15. And really the Jets need an elite playmaker at a corner. That's why I think you're going to see them go hard after one of the top corner free agencies. And again, I think that the Jets feel confident with the corners that they have, that they have some good 2 through 5 corners. They just need that number one corner. Same with two great pass rushers, though. Have a great pass rush completely. Again, like, I don't think they're going to use two. I mean, it'd be interesting. Like Thibodeaux and Karlaftis, like that could be very interesting if somehow they could get both of them. But then the problem becomes you can only play so many because Carl Lawson's back next year. You've already locked into John Franklin Myers. You're going to pay Quinnen Williams. So then all of a sudden it becomes, okay, Quinnen's got to be on the field. But then Karlaftis has to be on the field, and Thibodeaux. I mean, it's not a bad problem to have, but I do think they're going to try to spread the wealth out a little bit. A lot of people think Thibodeaux, and it's a hard one. Like a lot of people I see in the chat saying Thibodeaux, and I get the initial reaction. I believe elite pass rushers are hard to come by, but again, that's the other thing too. Like if the Jets believe Karlaftis can be a great pass rusher. Like if Thibodeau's an A, but Karlaftis is like an A minus, that could be something that is considered. And again, the Jets could have an elite defense. I mean, the Jets could have be top 5 in sacks, but if Zach Wilson's on his back and Zach Wilson gets hurt because they don't have a great left tackle, or Zach Wilson is getting beat up because the offensive line isn't great. I mean, really, like, Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, their careers are tied to Zach Wilson. And, it'd be great to have those great pass rushers. But again, if Wilson isn't great because he doesn't have great protection, that's going to be an interesting debate. And I really do think the draft, we're going to have these debates for the next couple months. Kyle Hamilton will not be a Jet. I do not see them draft, and I disagree with every mock draft that's Kyle Hamilton. I don't agree with Braden. Becton's going to be fine. Like, I hope so, Braden. Like, I really want Becton to be a great player. But again, you saw it. He played less snaps in his rookie year than Sam Darnold, and Darnold had that significant injury. This year, I mean, he hasn't been out there. I'm hoping, but again, like, if you were to put money on it, Braden, like, let's be really honest. If I was to say, you have to put a significant bet down. Mekhi Becton plays in, I won't even say 17 games. Mekhi Becton plays 16 games next year. And when I mean 16 games, he plays every offensive snap in 16 games. And you had to put money on it. Would you be confident that he, after the 2 years he's had with his injuries, that he's going to be out there for 16 games? I don't think you would. I really don't think you would. Let's see. So Reed trapped him in the dish. So there's Reed. I don't know. He missed 2 games this year. This year's it's asked about any linebackers the Jets targeted, whether free agent. I do see in free agency, the draft. I really like the kid Lloyd from Utah. I mean, that could be a dark horse in the top 10. Again, I don't think CJ Mosley's going anywhere because of the big contract. And even if the Jets come, they're still going to have to almost pay $15 million because of that god-awful Maccagnan contract. And again, Maccagnan strikes again. So, I mean, there's a lot of great athletic linebackers, especially on the Georgia and Utah team. I could see them, especially at the top of the second round. But again, it's all going to be impacted by free agency. If the Jets, I think the Jets in the second round, almost looking for what playmakers fall out of the first round at wide receiver potentially if they don't get one in free agency, or especially tight end like McBride out of Colorado State in the second round. So again, it's going to come down to the value. But again, don't forget too, they've also drafted Hamza and Sherwood, who were playing pretty well until they both were injured. I mean, they invested draft capital in them, and I wouldn't be surprised too if they almost do what they did again. Like, could they draft in the 5th round a safety that they feel probably with his speed isn't a safety in the NFL, but fits into the linebacker role? I mean, that could be something as well too. And don't forget too, the Jets, they're a 4-3 base, but they also play a lot of the 4-2-5 with all the wide receiver sets. So linebackers now, like, if you can get Lloyd, that's great. But again, it's more about getting help on the back end and the front 4 to me than necessarily getting linebackers. Becton looking like a wasted pick. Like, I wouldn't go that far as a wasted pick. How was it reached? Becton was fantastic last year, almost a Pro Bowl. Are you more on Jones? I mean, look, like I said, when Becton's out there, he looks like an all-pro. But again, the NFL's being available. I mean, it's great to see Becton out there pancaking people, but he's only out there 5 out of the 17 games. It's not worth it. Yeah, Devin Lloyd Justin Jones, I wouldn't make that bet in terms of Mekhi Becton. Devin Lloyd. Can't trade CJ or come because Mac going to have him through next year. Cagnan's gone. But yeah, I think that the Jets, if they could have traded CJ at the deadline, they would. If a team can trade for CJ and eat some of the cap, I do think the Jets would look into that. I always worry about guys that miss games for mysterious ghost injuries like Becton's chest injury, missed the game. Like, look, and that's the thing. And this staff too, don't forget, like, this staff is vastly different. And when you get a new coaching staff, you know, if they drafted you, there's a reason they drafted you, is because they believe in you and they're investing in you and they're putting their reputation on you. If you're coming in from the previous regime, you don't have that rapport, even as first round picks. And, you know, the Jets were not happy with Becton's weight. And again, they've said that they're happy with how he's maintained his weight. But again, when the Jets have invested a top 15 pick in you and they're potentially going to invest millions of dollars in you to be a left tackle in the NFL, you know, they want you to be in shape. And if they feel you're not in shape or putting the effort forth to take care of your body, it's tough. And I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect between this coaching staff and Becton. And look, Becton is an incredibly likable player. The fan base absolutely loves him. And when he's out there, he's a great player. But again, if he's not out there and he's not healthy and he's not taking the steps to be healthy, that's something. If not the Jets, where would you want to see Davante Adams land for agency if Green Bay doesn't keep him? To me, Davante's going to go to a chance where he can win a Super Bowl or wherever Aaron Rodgers is going. And if Rodgers is in Green Bay, which I think he will be, I don't think Davante leaves. I think Davante's going to get the bag and stay there. But again, if I'm the Jets, I know he's had some injury issues this year, but I still think he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. I'd look at Allen Robinson with Chicago because you're going to have likely a turnover in the coaching staff and the general manager. I do think you can get him because I do think the Bears will likely franchise tag him. And if you're the Jets, I wouldn't, even if it's trading like a 3rd and a 6th or trading a 4th and a 5th, I mean, I would take a shot and get a great receiver like that in the building where you have him on the outside, Corey Davis on the outside, and Elijah Moore in the middle. I do think that they could be a great combination. To be fair, he wouldn't have missed any time last year if Gase didn't rush him back from his shoulder injury. And Silas, that's a good point. But again, I mean, he had nagging injuries, but there was also times in games where if you really watch the Jets game and you watch the film, there would be times where he would have almost a limp off where he'd come out for like a play or two and then come back in. And again, when you're a left tackle in the NFL, you want to be out there protecting the quarterback. So again, I do think that they're right. And the chest injury with Justin Jett saying, Justin, thank you as always. And once again, guys, a friendly reminder for those of you new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And we want to get this out to as many Jet fans as possible. And we will be here back on Friday. Of course, talking about Jamal Adams trade. I know we shifted the draft, but again, Jets winning the Jamal Adams trade even more. It's going to be interesting to see if Seattle does do a rebuild, how he's going to react to that. But again, we're talking about a player now that has a huge contract and now has, unfortunately, an injury history. And I do think it's prevalent because now we're talking about Mekhi Becton, who early in his career, I love Mekhi. Like people, like you might think like I dislike Mekhi and I think Mekhi's a terrible player. No, I think Mekhi is a great player. And I do think he has all the potential in the world to be one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. The question is, can he get healthier and can he put his body in a position to be consistently on the field? Because again, if you're not out there, you're not helping your football team. And I do believe that he can be one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. I really do. I think can be as good as he wants to be. But history has shown us in the NFL time and time again, if you're a player that gets injured early in your career, it's rare that all of a sudden you're a guy that is consistently healthy later in your career. I mean, I can't think of really a great example where you see a guy miss 40% of their first 2 years and then come back. I mean, there's examples of maybe guys that have had like unfortunate ACL injuries and come back. But again, it's very rare to see guys that are injury prone early in their NFL careers all of a sudden are not injury prone and don't have that injury prone label going forward in their career. Keelan Allen did it. LOL. Again, I do think for wide receivers, I do think it's a little bit different because for linemen, I mean, we're also talking about huge bodies and we're talking about, giant human beings. I mean, for receivers, it's a little bit easier to recover. But in terms of offensive linemen and getting nagging injuries and foot injuries and knee injuries, I mean, that's really difficult. What do you think about for Chandler from the Cardinals next year? Like, I don't think the Cardinals trade him unless you're giving them a first-round pick, and I don't think Joe Douglas is going to trade a first-round pick, especially if he's going to use that on a pass rusher. So, I do think Quinn's going to get a second contract. Once again, guys, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Look, if you can get Chandler Jones for a third-round pick, I'd absolutely do it. But again, it's going to come down to the cost. And I mean, Cardinals were clear they want a lot for him. Then they're likely going to be a Super Bowl team. So if you're going to take one of their best pass rushers, I think they're going to make you pay a premium for it. No, they're not bringing another defensive coach to do Ulbrich. Again, I know it's easy to kill Sal and Ulbrich this year, but again, this defense, they're not getting better until March through May. They're not getting better until free agency in the draft. And in a perfect world, this defense would have been average. But when you're talking about a unit and like and this is a great example for the Jets, and we'll talk a little bit more about later, but the Jets, bad teams in the NFL get exposed more with injuries than any other team. Why? Because they don't have great depth, and the Jets are getting exposed like their defense this year. But again, we've seen this team the last 2 years under Joe Douglas invest in the offense, in the draft, and in free agency. The Jets' offense has had just as many injuries as this defense, but the Jets are able to move through that because they had depth. They had Morgan Moses to play right tackle and move Fan over to left tackle. I mean, they eventually traded for Lauren Tardif. I could never say his name right, for God's sakes, but they added him as a guard. And you look at the tight ends, they trade Chris Herndon, but they felt that they had 2 or 3 tight ends that really weren't that much different than Chris Herndon. And even though they're terrible, they still felt they had depth at the tight end position. You look at the wide receiver position. I mean, they've lost Corey Davis at stretches this season, and the offense has in some ways played better when Corey Davis isn't on the field. I mean, they lose Michael Carter, who was their best running back. Tevin Coleman steps up and is playing very well. But you look at the defense, they've lost their 2 starting safeties. And look, the Jets defense, even if everyone was healthy, the best they were going to do is average. And in the first 4 weeks, when they had most of the bodies out there, they looked pretty decent. One of the reasons the Jets looked god awful and their defense was historically bad ever since the Titans game was because that's when the injuries really started to pile up. I mean, you look really since that week. I mean, Marcus May was then out for the rest of the season. He's their defense's most experienced defensive back. I mean, Joyner was a starting safety. I mean, Ashton Davis has been playing better lately. But again, I mean, they're starting a guy off the Eagles practice squad at safety right now. The Jets are also starting linebackers, and Quincy Williams has been a great pickup. But again, they're starting linebackers, and especially in certain packages that should be on practice squads. I mean, Nathan Shepard's getting significant time in the defensive line because of the injuries to Bryce Huff and Carl Lawson. I mean, the Jets don't really have a great edge rusher because think about all the Jets defensive line had the most depth, and that's the unit that suffered the least. But still, I mean, they've lost Carl Lawson's. They lost Curry in the preseason because of the unfortunate injury. But again, that's still a loss. They lose Bryce Huff, who's been a great edge presence for this team. And to me, it's been one of the most underrated players on that defense. And really, he's been one of the biggest keys. Like you look at certain injuries, like since Bryce Huff missed significant time, this defense has really struggled. And you look, they're moving John Franklin Myers around. He's not really playing the position he's really comfortable in because of the lack of depth. I mean, Nathan Shepard's getting significant playing time. I mean, Marshall, their 6th-round pick, who, I mean, he should have been on the practice squad this entire year. And the hope was that he earns a role next year. I mean, he's been getting significant time in the last 2 weeks because of all the injuries. So once again, when it's a bare roster because of years of incompetence, not Joe Douglas, but Mike McCagnon, John Idzik. I mean, think about it's not just the whiffs on the first round picks, but it's the guys in the 2nd or 7th rounds. Like how many guys, like there's a reason like there's no McCagnon guys left on this roster because they aren't any good. They were terrible. I mean, they couldn't even stick in the NFL on a bad team. So even on bad team like the Jets, guys like in McCagnon's and Idzik's drafts couldn't stick. What does that tell you? I mean, think about Idzik's draft. How many guys are out of the league? How many guys in McCagnon's draft aren't even in the league? Not just not playing, but in the freaking league, man. So, Justin Jets going back to the draft. What tight ends do you like? I really like McBride, the kid from Colorado State. Reminds me a lot of Hayden Hurst. I mean, he's one of the best. He's top 7 in the country in terms of catches, productive. I mean, look, he's not going to be, in my opinion, I mean, there's no elite tight ends like last year. You're looking for good. Weidermeyer, to me, has the most upside in this draft. And I do think he's got the speed and athleticism to be great at all 3 levels. But again, he's had limited production this year. And while I put a lot of that on the quarterback play at Texas A&M, again, if you're a really great player in college, you should be able to make plays. And he's had drops this year. I mean, to me, McBride's like the safest pick. I think he's a Hayden Hurst. And I do think the Jets, even if they go on free agency side like an O.J. Howard or Hayden Hurst, they're still going to draft a tight end. And again, for the Jets tight end, you're just looking for a starting quality tight end. You would love to get a top 10 tight end in the league. But right now, you would settle for a guy that's just a consistent playmaker. And to me, Hurst is reliable. He blocks well. Sorry about that, McBride. He blocks well. He's able to get open. I mean, he's not going to be a burner. He's not going to be a guy that really stretches the field as a tight end, but he's just a solid guy. He knows how to settle in the zones. He's a great catcher. He can block well, which you want in this scheme. And again, you're just looking for a big buy that Wilson can dump it off to under pressure. And again, I do think that's hurt his development this year. I mean, Ryan Griffin, you've seen it. Like Ryan Griffin at best is a number 2 tight end on a really good football team at the very best. And I say that, as a stretch, but even so, I mean, he's become a reliable target for him. And you look like when he's under pressure, he's looking for Griffin in the middle of the field. And I do think that's a big loss with Corey Davis. I mean, I think Corey Davis in a weird way is almost like a tight end for Zach Wilson because he's just a big guy that he can throw the ball up to. I would love a Dustin Kell. I mean, to me, McBride's more of a traditional tight end. And again, in this West Coast system, like you see it in San Francisco, you want a guy that can block, and McBride can block. There's some guys like Isaiah Likely's a kid I really like. To me, he reminds me a lot of Dustin Keller. Really the tight end that you don't line up too much on the line. He lines up in the slot and can make plays. And look, maybe the Jets draft 2 tight ends in this draft. I really like Likely, the kid out of Coastal Carolina, explosive player. I think when we do the measurables at the combine and his pro day, he's going to go up boards. I really believe he's going to be one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends selected. But again, in the system, you want tight ends that can block. And I do think that McBride fits that a little bit more. And while, again, I say his upside might be limited compared to Likely and Weidermeyer in terms of explosive plays as a tight end, I just feel like he's almost a safer pick, and he's just a good, old, reliable tight end. And right now, you'd almost would just take that. You just want reliable players out there. Let's see. We need receivers taller than 5'11". That's going to be interesting, too, because outside the kid from Alabama in the draft, like I was thinking about receivers in the first round, and you look like outside the kid from Alabama who's 6'2", I mean, everyone else is like 5'11", 5'10", and it's amazing because I was like, well, because I'm doing the mock draft right now, and I'm looking at putting in receivers there. But again, you look at some of these guys, and you're looking for like a big receiver on the outside, and then really the draft this year doesn't have it. They have great playmakers, but they're just really small. So, but again, I mean, KD, I mean, it almost feels like that's the way the NFL's going. They're just looking like receivers just feel like they're getting smaller and smaller, and more agile and faster. I mean, if you can find like a great 6'3" receiver that can run, I mean, that's almost a rarity now in the NFL. So, but again, so guys, we're going to wrap this up in a minute. Thank you for joining us as always, talking about Jamal Adams, the impact we've had. And of course, that led to talk about the draft. Any final questions, please put them in the chat. How are we going to stop Taysom Hill from running 200 yards on us on Sunday? Well, we'll talk about that on Friday. Justin, so make sure to join us at 10 a.m. as we do that game preview. A lot to talk about with the Saints. Really intriguing matchup in terms of the quarterback play. At least you know that they're not going to get killed like Gardner Minshew throwing it all over the place. But again, Saints are an interesting matchup. Decent offensive line. To me, the bigger matchup is going to be the Saints defense versus the Jets offense. But we will talk about that in our preview. Make sure to put your questions and get your questions ready for 10 a.m. on Friday. We will be doing a live stream. We will answer all your questions as we preview that matchup and break down what the Jets defense has to do to try to slow down this offense with Taysom Hill. And again, you know, Taysom Hill, it'll be interesting. It definitely be an interesting game for the Jets, seeing how they attack it. I mean, it's a game the Jets could win. But again, Jets still have to do certain things on defense. We will break that down on Friday. So Brady Beth White, you know, the beginning of the show said it, Nolan Rich, this is Rich Sports Talk. Once again, you can follow us on Twitter at the handle Rich Sports Talk. We're trying to grow that on Twitter as well. Again, we can always go out there and make sure to try to grow the channel as much as possible. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as we talk more about the Jets this season and the Jets draft. Definitely coming up with mock drafts, so appreciate all the time to go out there. And we're looking forward to that. And also, I'm going to put up a poll too. Like, I'm working on this as well. And let me know what you think about this. Like, I don't mind talking about the Giants. I think it's easy because it's New York sports, and I just love New York sports in general. But I actually was thinking about this for Jet fans. Would you like to see me do a comparison video? It'll take a little bit of time just because, you know, I want to put all the work and make sure everything looks great in the video. But would you like a comparison video of, like, what general manager was worse for their New York franchise? Was it Mike Maccagnan and the New York Jets or Dave Gettleman with the New York Giants? Both were terrible, but which one was the worst of the worst? That's something I've been debating. If you guys would like me to see that do it, make sure you put that in the chat. Make sure you reach out to us on Twitter as well. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. As always, we'll see you Friday at 10 a.m. as we break down the New York Jets taking on the New Orleans Saints this weekend. and how the Jets can hopefully slow down Taysom Hill and Who Dat Nation. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it as always. We will see you next time here on Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for joining us as always.